Well, let's discuss the upkeep of heritage sites with architect Phil Mashabane. Now, Phil, thanks a lot for joining us on South Africa Tonight this evening. I mean, to see the condition that some of these heritage sites, as well as the figures that are a significant part of our history, a significant part of our culture, our identity, and looking at how debilitated they are, one wonders where the care is, and even if there is actually care for preserving such wonderful artifacts.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, naturally, sites of significance, be it heritage sites or conserved sites, even monuments and statues, you know, they don't just happen on their own. They're naturally motivated by the people who believe in that history. And they tend to serve the interest of the people who establish them as a memory. And of course, when they get established, there's what is called a conservation management plan that needs to be in place that seeks to suggest of how that site is managed moving forward, even financially. However, since some of these sites are established by communities, I think it's upon the communities to bring it to the attention of the relevant authorities who are tasked to look after these sites and etc., particularly soonest when they've been registered as heritage sites. They would, of course, approach the South African Heritage Resources Agency for seeking relief or assistance to maintain them. And of course, the South African Heritage Resources Agency is an organ of the state falling under the Department of Arts and Culture, or the principals of the Ministry of Arts and Culture. And there's the channel by which people can obtain some assistance to maintain those sites. But speaking for just in a vacuum, you know, government would look after these sites, but the need needs to be motivated by the people who appreciate that heritage, you know. And heritage varies from one ethnic group to another, from one tribe to the other, from one race to the other.
Yeah.
And some of them, of course, are privately maintained. And of course, that's what happens, like, for an example, on the ones which are privately maintained, like your typical apartheid museum, which is a standalone museum, which is self-sufficient, self-maintaining. And of course, I do think that they do get some funds either from Lotto or from the Department of Arts and Culture to patch up wherever it's necessary. But the bulk of the maintenance rests with the people who are running the museum.
The big question, Phil, then is, as you're saying, that sometimes the people need to take responsibility for preserving their heritage, preserving some of these iconic sites. I mean, I'm just going to take into consideration where the former president Nelson Mandela stayed, in that room in Alexandra Township. As we were looking at it, one wonders, is there enough knowledge around the fact that this room did, in fact, house one such a statesman, one such an iconic leader? And is there enough care amongst community members to even preserve this knowledge base? Or, as history would have it, and as we've continued living our lives, almost as though we've forgotten the past and we've forgotten just what it took to achieve this democratic state, that even such artifacts, such rooms that existed of significance are now being watered down?
Look, talking about Mr. Mandela's house, or the place where he stayed in Alex, you know, it's a question of education. The people who live around there currently, they may not know that Nelson Mandela lived there. And of course, those who cherished that history, they may be no longer there, but it needs to be recorded somewhere in the Department of Arts and Culture or South African Heritage Resources Agency, where these sites gets mapped out and be preserved, or a fund needs to be made available to preserve these sites. But for who are we preserving these sites if people are not adequately educated about even their own history? It is also regrettable that if we've got a Heritage Month or a Heritage Day, people would look like they care about their heritage only when they get reminded on this month, only or on that day. And heritage is something that needs to be preserved every day. And that's how we continuously educate our own people. And it needs to go also into our history books. But who writes these history books? The very same people who establish these sites. They should, of course, make an effort to get these sites recorded in the recordals of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, which is tasked, of course, to protect these sites and even to promote the culture of the people.
Yeah, and just really building from what you're saying, Phil, because this issue of education is an integral part of who we are. If we do not know where we come from, how do we identify the direction with which we're going? So you're saying that are the people educated enough to even know that former President Nelson Mandela even stayed in this room? Are we educated enough to know about the existence and the significance of some of our heritage sites? See, therein is the problem. If our history is so watered down, are our people going to know and understand who we are at just an identity level?
Look, education, it's more important, and it comes in many forms. It does not come in the classroom only. And the very same custodians of these sites, let's say, for example, your typical Apartheid Museum, Freedom Park, Lily's Leaf, and etc. When you fly out of Johannesburg to other parts of the continent or even the country for itself, what you see on the snippets that are shown on the flight television, it's about other sites somewhere else. But when you fly back into Johannesburg, you hardly see any notification, either even at airport as an advertisement or as a marketing, that such a site exists. This is the education that we talk about. You learn by observing, you learn by seeing, and then you develop an interest to go there. I mean, some of us, we've developed some of these sites, and we still feel attached to them in so many ways. But often the people that we meet, many of our colleagues and friends and families, they hardly know that these sites exist. This is the education that we talk about. And until such is done, or such attention is brought to the people, or education is brought to the people, even the maintenance of those sites becomes it's something in the periphery of the relevant institutions that are tasked to look after these sites.
Yeah.
This needs to be driven by the people. It should not be a top-down situation. If this is our heritage, we need to take care of our heritage right from where we sit or from where we proceed. And it would begin to draw the attention of those who've got deeper pockets or bigger purses, or who've got the budgets to look after these sites. You've got to knock at those doors before those doors open. They just don't open on their own and say the money is available to look after the site. Let's say, for example, even if the government made available some money, but it needs to make available the money to a structure that needs to look after this site. And it should be the people. The heritage needs to be preserved and be owned by the people. It's not a government thing. It's neither an institutional thing.
I mean, you make mention for such as institutions as the SA Heritage Resources Agency that's saying that they'll be providing the public with an audit of some of these heritage sites as well as their conditions. At the back of that, one wonders if there's even political will in preserving some of these iconic heritage sites. So in your opinion, Phil, I mean, you've been part of developing some of these sites that we've come to enjoy, this history and identity we've come to learn from over the years. So in your opinion, is there political will to actually preserve some of these heritage sites for the generation to come?
Look, you're asking about the political will. We are in a democratic South Africa. Whose heritage needs to be preserved? We need to ask that question first. And with all the population that makes up or that begins to enjoy this democracy, and we all enjoy different cultural heritages in many ways. And of course, whilst the government may be or may not be biased in looking after these sites, but we need to look at what exactly do these sites mean to all of us. The president's speech a few days ago, whereby he mentioned that some of these monuments or statues, they may not be representative of the new democracy, but they've become a reference point. They need to be, of course, they need to be preserved and be kept somewhere for posterity, and so that people should be able to understand exactly what happened. If we do anything today, why are we doing it? And the purpose, of course, of many of these museums is to keep the memory. You know, it's not only museums, it could be places for that matter. You know, places of memory is not necessarily museums and artifacts as well as statues. Even a place like, for example, you've just mentioned Mr. Mandela's house where he lived or the room where he lived in Alex. It's a place of significance, of course. But it all boils down for whose interest is this heritage being preserved? It's being preserved to be able to educate and for the future generations to enjoy. and also to set some of their decisions on those references. So there may not be a political will, but as I say, behind the door, there could be a resource that you need until you go and knock at that door and open the door. You may not truly establish whether there's a political will or not. Yeah. I'm not speaking for politicians, but until you knock at that government door to preserve these things, and of course we don't know what their mandate is, the Department of Arts and Culture by its extension with their various entities. But we are the voting population. We are the ones who are concerned about our heritage. We are the ones who need to go and knock at those doors and ask for such an attention. Whether it's deemed a political will or not a political will, where I sit or from where I've operated and the way we've operated with the communities to establish these museums and these places of importance, it is of the people that which needs to benefit from this, and it's driven largely by the people. Therefore, the people, they've elected this government, they've elected these politicians, they need to go back and speak to these politicians about these sites.
Phil Mashabane, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thanks a lot for joining us, Architect. They're sharing some insight into some of those heritage sites that have been seen to be damaged and not even well maintained over a period of time.